Welcome to this explainer. Today we're doing something a little different. We're going to evaluate the absolute foundational unit of global politics, the sovereign state. But we're not going to dust off an old textbook. No, we're going to treat this like a corporate performance review. Has the state hit its quarterly goals? Is it actually delivering value to its shareholders? And by shareholders, I mean, well, you and me. Really think about it. If the nation state was a digital service provider like your streaming app, would you renew your subscription today? Let's dive into what a state actually is, what we expect it to deliver, and whether it's truly living up to its social contract. Because the reality is the state, it's a human invention. It's a social tool, not some universal law of nature. And just like any tool, it can be evaluated, upgraded, or, even replaced if it stops working. All right, Section 1, Defining the Sovereign State. So let's look at the official job description. The famous sociologist Max Weber strips the state down to its absolute core mechanism, and it's pretty intense. He focuses entirely on the exclusive right to use force. According to Weber, a state is a compulsory political organization, meaning, you don't get to just opt out of it, that maintains a monopoly on the legitimate use of physical violence within its borders. That means only the state can legally lock someone up or deploy a military. It's a pretty sobering starting point for our review, right? It establishes that, at its core, the state is fundamentally about organized power. Building on Weber's definition, international law actually outlines the basic anatomy required to be recognized as a state on the world stage. You need three basic things: a defined territory, a permanent population, and an effective government capable of conducting relations with other states. Basically, this is the baseline requirement just to get a seat at the diplomatic table. If you don't have these three elements functioning together, well, you can't officially open for business in the international community. Moving on to Section 2, the global state system. Now, the modern framework we live in traces its roots way back to the 1648 Peace of Westphalia. This famously ended decades of religious wars in Europe and established a secular system of independent states based on legal equality and non-intervention. But here's the major catch, and it's a big one. This system operates in a state of anarchy. Now, in international relations, anarchy doesn't mean, chaos in the streets. It just means there is no centralized global authority, no world CEO or global police force sitting above these sovereign states to enforce the rules. They're entirely on their own, navigating this massive, unregulated free market of nations. Because there's no central authority, sovereignty isn't just one static thing you either have or you don't. As scholar Stephen Krosner brilliantly illustrates, a state's authority is actually multidimensional. First up, there's international legal sovereignty, which is essentially mutual recognition by your peers. Second is Westphalian sovereignty, that's keeping outside authorities out of your internal business. And third is domestic sovereignty, which is your actual internal control. Now, notice the implications of failure here. A state can fail in distinct, very different ways depending on which of these dimensions breaks down. It's exactly like a corporation facing an internal management crisis versus, say, a hostile external takeover. Okay, let's get into Section 3, the 5 core expectations. Now that we know what a state is, let's outline the key performance indicators. These 5 deliverables form the unwritten social contract between a state and its citizens. We expect our governments to provide security from threats, ensure our freedom and independence, maintain order in our daily interactions, uphold equitable justice, and foster economic welfare and high employment. Wow, that is a massive, incredibly complex set of expectations to place on any human institution. But when we pay our taxes and pledge our loyalty, these 5 things are exactly what we're buying. In the traditional view of international relations, particularly when looking at developed regions like Western Europe, North America, or Japan, the state is generally seen as highly successful at hitting all of these KPIs. From this perspective, the state system isn't just functional, it's revered as the absolute best mechanism humanity has ever come up with for organizing political life. It's seen as the ultimate vehicle for delivering those 5 core values safely and effectively to the highest number of people. But of course, we need to look at Section 4, expectations versus reality. Because any fair performance review has to objectively contrast those high normative expectations with the hard empirical realities on the ground. Take a look at this quote by scholar Ursula Daxecker. It highlights a really dark paradox at the heart of our system. The very entity hired to protect populations can sometimes become their greatest threat. History shows us, repeatedly, that states can be the problem just as much as they're the solution. The guardian we employ literally has the weapons and the authority to turn against us. This historical image of trench warfare is a pretty terrifying reminder of how states routinely prioritize their own systemic survival and national security, often at a truly devastating human cost to their own citizens. When the state's geopolitical interests conflict with individual human welfare, the state's survival usually wins out, sometimes resulting in slaughter on a massive scale. The geopolitical company will almost always try to save itself, even if it means sacrificing its own employees and shareholders in the process. And when we look closer, exploring this critical view reveals profound gaps in performance across the globe. Authoritarian regimes frequently suppress civil liberties just to maintain their grip on power. Even democratic states practicing real estatecraft will sometimes just turn a blind eye to terrible human rights violations, all to maintain strategic geopolitical alliances. At the extreme, predatory governments actively turn those instruments of physical force, the exact ones Max Weber defined, against their own citizens. The reality is, our service provider often severely breaches the terms of the contract. Which brings us to a really fascinating concept by scholar Robert Jackson, the quasi-state. Remember that sovereignty table we looked at earlier? Well, quasi-states are entities that have international legal sovereignty, meaning they have a seat at the UN, they're protected from outside conquest by international norms, yet functionally, they entirely lack the domestic capacity to deliver basic socioeconomic needs or security. They exist formally on paper, they have the logo and the brand, but they struggle to actually function on the ground, leaving millions vulnerable and unprotected. So where do we go from here? Section 5, to preserve or evolve. Having reviewed this somewhat spotty performance, we arrive at the ultimate debate among international relations scholars. What should be the future of this system? On one side, the realist view argues we absolutely must preserve the sovereign state. Because in a world of anarchy, it's our only defense against total chaos or the terrifying prospect of a tyrannical global government. On the flip side, the liberal and functionalist view argues that modern challenges, things like climate change, global pandemics, and international terrorism, simply do not respect borders. To survive, they argue, we have to evolve and pool our sovereignty. They're essentially arguing for a corporate merger. But rather than simply disappearing or collapsing, statehood is functionally transforming right before our eyes. We are seeing the rise of what's called the reactive state. Instead of acting as isolated, walled-off guardians, modern governments are selectively ceding some of their authority to manage shared global crises. They're becoming deeply entangled in complex transnational regulatory structures and integrated regions like the European Union. So the state isn't dying. It's actively adapting its business model to stay relevant in a highly interconnected world. As we wrap up this explainer, I want you to consider the performance of your own state. Look at how it handles your security, your freedom, your order, justice, and welfare. Based on all the metrics we've discussed today, ask yourself, are we witnessing the twilight of the Westphalian sovereign state, a relic of 1648, or is it simply adapting to a brand new era of borderless global challenges? It's an absolutely critical question to carry with you as you analyze the global news. Thanks so much for joining me, and keep questioning the systems around you.